Ajahn, you mentioned that you were born in Vietnam and then did your training in Thailand. And I understand that it was in Thailand, and particularly in the northeast of Thailand, that the contemporary forest tradition, as it's been revived in the last 100 years or so, it came out of that part of the world. Why do you think the forest tradition has been so popular in Thailand? And could you talk to us a little bit about Ajahn Chah, who was one of the masters, really, of that tradition?
Yeah, I think with Buddhism, with most organized religion or with any religion, it has its waves of kind of lots of support, lots of enthusiasm, and then it wanes. It gets corrupted with popularity, with wealth and fame. There comes corruption, and people get distracted, and then that gets moves away from that. So what happened about 150 years ago was actually Ajahn Mun, who precedes Ajahn Chah. He pretty much restarted the whole forest tradition. He came from a city monastery, and he became inspired by reading the old texts to go off in the forest to practice. And then after, I think, 15, 20 years, there was some kind of deep realization. And then he started teaching other people. So he had a following. Different monks would follow him into the forest, get some teaching, and then would send them away. So that starts to build up. So he's pretty much single-handedly restarted the forest tradition in Thailand about 150 years ago. He passed away in 1947. And Ajahn Chah was one of his students. But even though Ajahn Chah only lived with him for 3 days, he also came from a city monastery, but also did a lot of practice in the forest by himself for 15 to 20 years. And from that, the Ajahn Chah also had, a lot of deep realization. After he was wandering around 20, 25 years, he went back home to his home village and started Wat Nong Papong, which is the main monastery. He was a very charismatic teacher, so had a lot of students, a lot of followers to come. And they would start offering land everywhere. So he had about 30 branch monasteries by the time he died in the 1992. He was part of that wave of forest monks who practiced in the forest. So really strong meditation, and could lead people. He could teach in different ways. And one of Ajahn Chah's gift was that he could teach Westerners in a way that maybe other Thai teachers couldn't bridge the cultural gap. And so now Ajahn Chah's tradition is kind of spread over the world, to England, to the US, the EU, and of course to Australia.
In the footsteps of Ajahn Mun and Ajahn Chah, the monks who led the revival of the forest tradition of Theravadin Buddhism as a way of getting back to what they saw as the basics of Buddhism, that's Ajahn Khemavaro, the present abbot of Wat Buddha Dhamma, a forest monastery among the trees of Darug National Park to the north of Sydney. Well, having heard about what Ajahn's life is like now, let's find out where his own journey to Buddhism began. What happened to the former stockbroker who once smuggled cigarettes to a friend on a Buddhist retreat?
I grew up actually in a Catholic family. Went to a Catholic school even for a few years. But mostly growing up, moving from Vietnam to the US about 1975. And with any immigrant family, you're busy kind of, making your way. So through high school, there was a period when we went to church a lot. But mostly as you get to high school, I think that's kind of died out. We're busy with other activities kind of after school. Just go to church on Christmas Eve, Easter maybe. And I was a stockbroker in Thailand, and I think back then had Buddhist friends. But being Catholic, had kind of a mild interest in Buddhism. And I remember in Bangkok, as kind of a young man going to work and partying, we would leave the clubs about 4 or 5 in the morning, and that's what you see the monks walking on arms round. So we were always encouraged to put some food in the bowl, and they were kind of jokingly say, yeah, all the bad karma we made this evening, we have to balance it out by giving the food to the monks. So we get some bites of food on our way back and put it into the monk's bowl. So that's extensive my Buddhism. And then I think I had a friend in the U.S. He was visiting, and he'd done the bars and beaches. So with any kind of tourist, you're kind of bored after a while. So looking for something new. So one day he flipped through an English language newspaper, and it said that you can become a monk for 2 weeks in a monastery. He's like, oh yeah, I haven't done that before. That'd be interesting. And something different to tell your friends. So he had a mild interest in Buddhism. So when he got there, he didn't know there was no TV. He couldn't smoke. And couldn't do much. So
That's a
he's
shock.
totally bored. That's why he was totally bored, he said. So that's what he called me. It's like, I'm really bored and I've got another week to go. Why don't you come in and keep me company and bring some cigarettes too. So I would come in and keep him company. And that's when I met the monk. And he started explaining, the teaching of Buddhism and meditation. And it got me really interested.
That's a terrific story. Smuggling cigarettes into a monastery and ending up further down the track, a monk yourself. I mean, that was a couple of decades ago now. And I mean, for 20 years, you've lived this very, very seriously. And just in closing, I wonder where you see the future of the forest tradition. We were talking before about the relationship of the forest tradition and its practice to a wider world. I guess one of the ways that a secluded community might serve its neighbours is by living out a contrast to the mainstream's values and culture. And in that context, what do you see as the future for the forest tradition in a world that is dealing with climate change?
I think, as you may know, staring into the crystal ball of the future is a bit of always kind of a risky task because it's very uncertain. But as far as I can tell or extrapolate, especially during this pandemic, where there is a great need actually for centers like ours. We had double, triple amount of people coming to the monastery during the pandemic. Mostly at first because obviously they were out of a job, and second because of the level of stress that people had to deal with of the unknown. So and that was a kind of great opportunity for us just to be able to allow people to come to a quiet place and to sort out all the noise of what's happening in their life and to learn to adapt, to change to the situation. And what the pandemic remind everybody is that, life is uncertain. It's not a sure thing. These buildings might look very solid. The body might look solid. But all it took was a few little bugs to shook everybody up. Even about great technology, we cannot make things certain. That's not a possibility. You have a body, you have a building, they're going to be affected by change. Either way. Sometimes it's slow and gradual. Other times it can be very drastic. Life is constantly changing. And that isn't the problem. Change isn't the problem. It's the fact that we attach and we think it should be in a certain way. But if you learn to train the mind, learn to look at the world in a certain way, and to accept change as part of life, then we can learn to live with it, learn to adapt when we have to. Yes, we can't go out anymore. We can't hug people. But it's not the end of the world. You can look at the positive things. There's still lots of things that we can do. And it also encourages people just to spend, some quiet time in the forest, to learn to energize your mind, to, look out for your mental health. If you have a healthy mind, you can cope with anything that comes up. And that's much more important.
Ajahn Khemavaro is the abbot of Wat Buddha Dhamma, a monastery in the forest tradition of Theravadin Buddhism. His monastery is literally located in a forest among the eucalypts of Darug National Park, a few hours to the north of Sydney.